The first alien ship appeared above Earth on a cold morning in March 2247. It was massive, dark, and shaped like a blade. People across the world stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. Some cried, some prayed, most simply stared in silence. Admiral Park was 53 years old when the call came. He had served in the Navy for 30 years, fought in 2 wars, and buried too many friends. His hair was gray at the temples, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen the worst of humanity. Now he would be the first human to speak to beings from another world. The aliens called themselves the. They were tall, thin creatures with pale blue skin and 4 arms. They moved with a strange grace, like dancers made of ice. Their ship carried a message from something called the Galactic Council, a government of dozens of alien races that had ruled the stars for thousands of years. The Council's message was simple. Earth was primitive. Humans were young. The wise thing to do was to accept protection, submit to Council governance, and humanity would be safe. Admiral Park listened to their offer in the meeting room of his flagship. The representative, a creature named, spoke with obvious pride. He clearly expected Park to bow, to thank them, to accept whatever terms they offered. Instead, Park smiled. "Thank you for your generous offer," he said, "but we would prefer a trade agreement." 4 eyes blinked in confusion. This was not how primitive species behaved. They were supposed to be afraid. They were supposed to submit. But Park was not afraid. He had learned long ago that fear was a choice, and he had chosen differently. The Council accepted the trade agreement, mostly because they did not know what else to do. The humans were strange. They did not fit into any category the ancient races understood. They were not aggressive enough to be a threat, but not weak enough to be ignored. Over the next 3 centuries, humanity spread across the stars. They colonized 17 systems, built cities on 100 worlds, and created a civilization that spanned light years. But they did something else, too, something that confused the galaxy even more than their refusal to submit. They were kind. When a plague swept through, the human doctors arrived within weeks. They asked for nothing in return. When the mining colonies faced famine, human ships brought food and supplies. Again, they asked for nothing. When smaller races were bullied by larger ones, human diplomats stepped in and negotiated fair settlements. The galaxy did not know how to react. The called humans soft and laughed at their weakness. The called them cowards who were too afraid to fight. But the oldest in race on the council watched the humans carefully. They had seen many species rise and fall over their long history. They recognized something in humanity that the others missed. "They are not soft," the elder told her students. "They are waiting." No one listened to her. Commander was 37 years old when she took command of the border station above Nu. It was a beautiful colony, green hills, blue oceans, and cities that sparkled in the sunlight. More than 2 million people called it home. Had joined the military because she believed in protecting people. She had trained for years, studied tactics and strategy, and dreamed of heroic battles. But her posting to Nu was quiet, peaceful, almost boring. She did not complain. Peace was good. Peace meant families could raise children without fear. Peace meant scientists could study the stars. Peace meant artists could create beauty. Had seen enough of human history to know that peace was precious and rare. Every week she filed her report to Earth Command. Every week the report said the same thing: all quiet, no incidents, colony thriving. She became friends with the people below. Doctor, who ran the central hospital. Lieutenant, who flew supply shuttles between the surface and the station. Old Man Ha, who had been one of the first settlers and now spent his days teaching history to children. They were good people, simple people, people who wanted nothing more than to live their lives in peace. On the night before everything changed, stood at the observation window of her station and looked down at the colony. The lights of the cities glowed like stars against the dark land. Somewhere down there, Children were going to sleep. Parents were telling bedtime stories. Friends were sharing meals and laughter. She felt a strange unease in her chest, a feeling she could not explain. Something was coming. She could sense it, the way animals sense storms before they arrive. But she pushed the feeling aside. The galaxy was at peace. The council maintained order. Humanity had been good neighbors for 300 years. What could possibly go wrong? She went to bed that night without knowing that her world was about to end. In his office reviewed the final attack plans. He had waited a long time for this moment. The humans had embarrassed him 3 centuries ago when that gray-haired admiral had refused to submit. Now their trade routes were too successful. Their technology was advancing too fast. Other races were beginning to prefer human goods over products. It was time to teach them their place. He approved the attack order and went to sleep with a smile on his face. He dreamed of fire and screaming and the beautiful sight of human worlds burning. He had no idea what he was about to awaken. The attack came at 3:47, when most of the colony was sleeping. Commander was dreaming of her mother's garden when the alarms tore her awake. Red lights flashed across her quarters. The station shook like a ship in a storm. She was on her feet and running before her mind fully understood what was happening. "Report," she shouted as she burst onto the command deck. Her second officer turned to her with a face white as bone. "Commander, 47 ships. They dropped out of hyperspace 2 minutes ago and started firing immediately. No warning, no demands. They're targeting civilian sectors." Felt her blood turn to ice. "Civilian sectors, are you sure?" "Yes, Commander. They're not aiming at military targets. They're hitting hospitals, schools, residential areas." Through the observation window, could see the planet below. Bright flashes of light bloomed across the surface, orbital strikes hitting city after city. Each flash was thousands of lives ending in an instant. She tried to raise the planetary defense grid, but it had been designed to stop asteroids, not. It was already overwhelmed. She tried to contact Earth Command, but the ships were jamming all long-range communications. She tried to launch her station's small fighter wing, but they were outnumbered 20-1. There was nothing she could do but watch her world burn. Down on the surface, Doctor was working the night shift at the central hospital when the first strike hit. The building shook, ceiling tiles fell, patients screamed. Then the power went out and everything was darkness. Grabbed a flashlight and started moving through the halls. She found nurses helping patients out of beds. She found doctors trying to operate by emergency light. She found children crying for parents who would never come. The second strike hit closer, felt the heat through the walls. She heard glass shattering somewhere nearby, the air filled with smoke and dust and the terrible smell of burning. She knew in that moment that she could not save everyone. There were too many wounded and not enough time. So she made the choice that doctors pray they never have to make. She started deciding who could be saved and who could not. For 6 hours, she worked without rest. She performed surgeries by flashlight. She held the hands of dying patients and told them everything would be okay, even when she knew it was a lie. She carried children through burning hallways and handed them to evacuation teams. When dawn finally came, she walked outside and saw what remained of her city. Buildings that had stood for a century were now smoking ruins. Streets were filled with bodies. The sky was dark with ash. She sat down on the broken steps of her hospital and cried. Lieutenant had been flying evacuation shuttles when his ship was hit. The explosion threw him forward against his controls. Alarms screamed. Warning lights flashed. He felt the shuttle spinning out of control, falling toward the ground below. He woke up in a field of wheat, surrounded by twisted metal. Both his legs were broken. His communication unit was dying, its battery nearly drained. Blood ran down his face from a wound he could not see. For a long moment, he simply lay there, staring at the burning sky. Then he heard laughter. Ground troops had landed nearby. They were walking through the wheat field, hunting for survivors. Their voices carried across the distance, casual, cheerful, like they were playing a game. Watched as they found a family hiding in a crater. A mother, a father, two children. He watched as the soldiers raised their weapons. He heard the screams, then silence. Something cold and hard formed in his chest. He pulled out his communication unit and began recording. He filmed everything: the burning cities, the mass graves, the soldiers laughing as they hunted civilians. He filmed until his battery died and then lay in the wheat field, waiting for rescue or death. By the time the fleet finally departed, 1.8 million humans were dead. The broadcast their victory to every corner of the galaxy. They showed the burning cities, the shattered stations, the fleeing refugees. Their message was clear: humanity had grown too confident, and now they had been put in their place. Gave a speech from his, praising the brave warriors who had taught the humans a lesson. He smiled as he spoke, his 4 eyes bright with pride. He expected the other races to applaud. Some did. They laughed and said the humans deserved it. Several smaller races celebrated, happy to see a rival brought low. But not everyone was smiling. The elder watched the broadcast in silence. She remembered the human doctors who had saved her world from plague. She remembered the human diplomats who had treated her people with respect. She remembered the quiet kindness that humanity had shown for 3 centuries. And she remembered her warning: they are waiting. "Fools," she whispered, "you have no idea what you have done." 47 hours after the attack, Lieutenant's recording reached Earth. It was played for the emergency assembly. Every human leader, every military commander, every person with power and responsibility. They watched in silence as children were hunted through wheat fields. They listened to the laughter of soldiers standing over mass graves. When the recording ended, no one spoke. President sat at the head of the table, her face perfectly still. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair and gentle eyes. She had been elected on a platform of peace and cooperation. Now she looked at the faces around the table, the grief, the rage, the desperate need for someone to tell them what to do. 300 years, she said quietly. 300 years of patience, of kindness, of turning the other cheek. She stood up, and her gentle eyes turned to steel. No more. The galaxy waited for humanity to scream. They expected protests, demands, angry speeches before the council. They expected humans to cry and beg for justice, to plead with the ancient races for help. That was what young species did when they were hurt. They ran to their elders and asked for protection. But humanity said nothing. 1 day passed, then 2, then a week. Human ambassadors across the galaxy simply stopped showing up to meetings. Human trade ships continued their routes in silence, their crews speaking only when necessary. Human colonies went dark, their communication channels quiet. They celebrated their victory, gave speech after speech about the successful operation, about how humanity had finally learned its place. His people threw festivals and parades. They truly believed they had won. They mocked humanity's weakness. Where is their anger? They laughed. Where is their revenge? They are nothing but cowards who run and hide when struck. But not everyone was laughing. The elder sent a private message to her government. Prepare emergency supplies. Something terrible is coming. On Earth, behind doors that no alien had ever seen, humanity was preparing. President stood in a bunker 3 miles beneath the surface of New Geneva. The room was vast, filled with holographic displays and communication equipment. Around her sat the true leadership of humanity, not the diplomats and trade ministers the galaxy knew, but the generals, admirals, and intelligence chiefs who had waited in the shadows for 3 centuries. General Shin stepped forward. He was an old man, 72 years old, with white hair and a face like carved stone. For 40 years, He had pretended to be a logistics officer, a boring man who moved supplies and filed paperwork. Now he removed his fake rank insignia and pinned on the stars he had actually earned. "The fleet is ready, Madam President," he said. 17 battle groups, 4,000 warships, 2 million soldiers. The other leaders shifted in their seats. They had known this force existed. Humanity had never truly disarmed, but hearing the numbers spoken aloud made it real. "Show me," the president said. Pressed a button, and the holographic display filled with images. Shipyards that had been under construction for decades suddenly revealed fully armed warships rolling off their lines. Training facilities that had been closed for maintenance showed elite soldiers practicing combat maneuvers. Weapons laboratories that had been studying defensive technology unveiled plasma cannons and things even worse. Humanity had spent 3 centuries preparing for a war they hoped would never come. President studied the images in silence. She thought of her grandmother who had survived the last war on Earth. She thought of the promise humanity had made to itself, never again. Never again would they be the monsters. Never again would they choose violence when peace was possible. But they had made that choice for them. "What about the Council?" asked Foreign Minister O. "If we attack the other races may unite against us." Intelligence Director Han answered. She was a small woman with sharp eyes who had spent 30 years learning the secrets of the galaxy. "They won't. We've spent 3 centuries building goodwill. They owe us for saving their world from plague. They owe us for fair trade deals when they were cheating them. A dozen smaller races owe us for protection and kindness." She smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "They have no friends, only those who fear them. When we show that fear is no longer necessary, they will stand alone." President nodded slowly, and the civilians. General understood her question. "Our rules of engagement remain the same, Madam President. We do not target non-combatants. We do not destroy infrastructure that civilians depend on. We are not them." "Good." She turned to face the room, and her voice carried the weight of centuries. "Let me be clear. We are not doing this for revenge. We are not doing this because we enjoy violence. We are doing this because some lines cannot be crossed, because if we do not respond, they will do this again, to us, to others, to anyone they see as weak." She placed her hands on the table. 300 years ago, we showed the galaxy that humanity could choose peace. Now we show them what happens when that choice is taken from us. The vote was unanimous. Across human space, the preparations accelerated. Ships that had been hidden in asteroid fields and gas giant moons began moving into formation. Soldiers who had served as peacekeepers reported to their true units. Factories that had been producing consumer goods switched to military production overnight. Fleet Admiral Park took command of the first Retribution Fleet. She was 54 years old, the granddaughter of the admiral who had first spoken to the 3 centuries ago. She had her grandfather's calm eyes and his talent for saying exactly what needed to be said. Before the fleet departed, she addressed her crews over every channel. 3 weeks ago, they murdered 1.8 million of our people, children, families, friends. They did this because they thought we were weak, because they thought we would not fight back, because they thought we were afraid. She paused, letting the silence stretch. They were wrong. Around her, 4,000 warships powered up their engines. 2 million soldiers checked their weapons one final time. The largest military force humanity had ever assembled prepared to move. "We do not fight for revenge," Admiral Park continued. "We fight so this never happens again. We fight so that every race in this galaxy knows there are lines you do not cross, and if you cross them, you face the consequences." She turned to her navigation officer. "Set course for space." "Yes, Admiral," course laid in. "All ships engage." The fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving nothing behind but empty darkness. Across the galaxy, sensors detected the movement. Alien races watched in confusion as the largest fleet in recorded history moved toward territory. They scrambled to respond, suddenly realizing that their victory celebration might have been premature. And on Earth, President sent a single message to the Galactic Council, just 8 words. "You have broken the peace, now witness consequences." The silence was over. The border station detected the human fleet 3 hours before it arrived. The officer on duty stared at his screens in disbelief, then checked them again, then called his commander. "Sir, you need to see this." Commander looked at the readings and felt his 4 hearts stop beating. Thousands of warships, millions of soldiers, a force larger than anything that had faced in 10,000 years. "That's impossible," he whispered. "The humans don't have." The first round hit his station before he could finish the sentence. Admiral Park watched from her flagship as the border defenses crumbled. They had expected a weak, frightened enemy. They had prepared for diplomacy, not war. Their border stations were designed to intimidate traders and refugee ships, not stop an actual military force. The human fleet swept through them like fire through dry grass. But Admiral Park did not head for military targets. She had something else in mind. Navigation, set course for the agricultural worlds. Her second officer, Captain, looked up in surprise. "Agricultural worlds, Admiral, not their military bases." "Correct," Park's voice was calm and cold. "They attacked our civilians, our hospitals, our schools. They wanted us to feel helpless. Now we return the favor." The fleet arrived at the farming worlds 2 days later. These planets fed the entire empire. Billions of tons of grain and meat shipped across their territory every year. Without them, the economy would collapse within months. Admiral Park opened a channel to the planetary governor. "This is Admiral Park of the Human Defense Force. You have 1 hour to evacuate all military personnel. After that, we destroy your orbital platforms, your transport ships, and your storage facilities." The governor's face appeared on screen, all 4 eyes wide with fear. "You can't. Millions will starve." "We're not targeting civilians," Park said. "We're targeting infrastructure. Your people can still farm, they just can't ship the food off-world." She paused. "This is more mercy than you showed us." The governor tried to argue, to negotiate, to threaten. Park simply ended the transmission and waited. 1 hour later, the human fleet opened fire. They destroyed the orbital platforms with surgical precision. They hit the cargo ships and storage facilities. They did not touch the farms themselves, or the cities, or the homes where families lived. When they were done, the agricultural system was crippled, but not a single civilian had been harmed. The message was clear: we could have done what you did. We chose not to. Notice the difference. Over the next month, the pattern repeated across space. Human fleets appeared without warning and destroyed military targets, fuel depots, communication relays, and supply lines. They were fast, precise, and unstoppable. They left civilians untouched but stripped away everything the military needed to function. The commanders were confused. This was not how war was supposed to work. You attacked cities. You killed civilians. You made your enemy fear you. Why were the humans holding back? Demanded a decisive battle. He gathered the largest fleet in history, 3,000 warships, veterans of 100 campaigns, and positioned them at the Han Nebula. This was sacred ground for a place they had held for 10,000 years. Here, they would make their stand. Admiral Park accepted the invitation. Captain Moon commanded the destroyer Remembrance. She was 32 years old, the daughter of a teacher and a farmer from New. Her parents had died in the massacre, along with her younger brother, her grandmother, and 17 of her closest friends. When she learned they would be fighting at Han, she volunteered for the most dangerous assignment, leading the assault on the flagship. Her crew of 200 followed her without question. The Battle of Han began at dawn local time. 3,000 ships against 4,000 human ships that had numbers and experience. The humans had fury and technology that the galaxy had never seen. For 6 hours, the nebula burned. Captain Moon drove her destroyer straight into the heart of the formation. She weaved between enemy ships, dodging fire that should have destroyed her a dozen times over. Her crew worked in perfect sync, every person doing their job without hesitation. She broadcast on all frequencies as she flew, for our families, for the 1.8 million who will never see another sunrise. The flagship was enormous, a mountain of metal and weapons that had terrified enemies for. Captain Moon flew toward it without slowing down. "Captain," her first officer said, "we're on a collision course." "I know." "Captain." "I know." She looked at her crew, these brave men and women who had followed her into hell. "If anyone wants to leave, the escape pods are ready." No one moved. The Remembrance hit the flagship at full speed, punching through its shields and armor like a knife through paper. The explosion was visible across the entire nebula, a brief second sun that marked the end of the command structure. When the light faded, the battle was already over. Without their flagship, without their commanders, the fleet fell into chaos. Human ships picked them apart with methodical precision. 3,000 warships had entered the Battle of Han. 47 survived to retreat. Across the galaxy, the other races watched in stunned silence. They who had terrified them had been utterly destroyed by a species they had dismissed as weak and soft. The Galactic Council called an emergency session, demanded help, demanded that the other races unite against human aggression. He spoke for 3 hours, pleading and threatening in turn. When he finished, the council chamber was silent. No one lifted a finger to help because they all remembered 3 centuries of human kindness. They remembered the hospitals and the fair trade deals and the kept promises. They remembered that humanity had given them every reason to be friends. And they remembered the laughing while children burned. The elder spoke for the first time. "You made your choice, now live with the consequences." Screamed and raged, but it changed nothing. They were alone. 3 months after the war began, they surrendered unconditionally. The surrender ceremony took place on a dead moon orbiting the president stood on one side of a steel table. The new leadership stood on the other, their heads bowed in shame. Was not among them. He had been captured 3 weeks earlier, trying to flee to the outer territories. Now he sat in a holding cell, waiting to learn his fate. President did not smile as they signed the surrender documents. There was no joy in this moment, no satisfaction. 1.8 million of her people were still dead. Nothing could bring them back. "This war is over," she said. "But let me be clear about what happens next. We will not occupy your worlds. We will not enslave your people. We will not do to you what you did to us." The leaders looked up in surprise. They had expected revenge. They had expected cruelty. It was what they would have done. "Instead," continued, "you will pay reparations. You will help rebuild new. And you will remember for the rest of your history what happens when you cross lines that should not be crossed." The trial of was broadcast across the galaxy. He was brought before a human court, judged by human laws, surrounded by evidence of his crimes. The footage Lieutenant had recorded was played for everyone to see. The orders had signed. The messages he had sent laughing about the massacre. Every terrible detail exposed to the light. Expected execution. He had given the same sentence to countless enemies over his long career. It seemed fitting that he would receive it in return. Instead, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment. His cell had a window that faced new. Every day, for the rest of his life, he watched the humans rebuild what he had destroyed. He watched new cities rise from the ashes. He watched children play in parks that had once been mass graves. He watched life return to a world he had tried to kill. It was worse than death, and the humans knew it. Ambassador O stood before the Galactic Council 6 months after the war's end. She was young for such an important position, barely 40 years old. But she had earned her place through skill and dedication, and now she carried the voice of humanity to the stars. The council chamber was silent as she approached the central podium. Representatives from dozens of races watched her with a mixture of fear and respect. Everything had changed. The old order was broken, and no one knew what would replace it. 300 years ago, humanity made first contact with the galaxy. We were told to submit. We refused. We were told we were primitive. We proved otherwise. We were told we were weak. We showed you kindness instead. She looked around the chamber, meeting every eye. For 3 centuries, we chose peace. We built hospitals on worlds that were not our own. We traded fairly with races that cheated us. We kept our promises even when others broke theirs. We did this because we believed that kindness was strength, that patience was wisdom, that the best way to make friends was to be a friend. Her voice hardened. And then the murdered 1.8 million of our people, children, families, innocents who had never harmed anyone. They did this because they thought we were soft, because they thought patience meant weakness, because they could not understand that a species might choose peace when it was capable of war. She placed a data chip on the podium. This contains our terms for the new peace. They are generous, more generous than you deserve, given that not one of you lifted a finger when our people were dying. But we are not you. We do not punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. We do not burn worlds because we are angry. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried across the chamber like thunder. But let me be absolutely clear. What they did will never happen again. Not to us. Not to anyone. If any race in this galaxy attacks civilian populations, if any race commits the kind of atrocity we witnessed at New, humanity will respond. Swiftly, completely, without mercy. She smiled, and it was the smile of a species that had learned a terrible lesson. We would rather be your friends. We would rather trade and cooperate and build a better galaxy together. That is still our first choice, our preferred choice, but it is not our only choice. Remember that. The council accepted her terms unanimously. 50 years passed. The galaxy changed. Humanity took its place among the great powers, respected and sometimes feared. The slowly rebuilt, humbled but alive. Other races learned the lesson that had been written in fire and blood. Some lines should not be crossed. On New, the memorial garden stretched for kilometers. Black stone walls held the names of 1.8 million dead, each one carved by human hands, each one remembered. Elder Ha was 97 years old when he walked through those gardens with his great-granddaughter. He moved slowly now, his old body tired from a long life. But his mind was still sharp, and his memories were still clear. "Grandfather," the little girl asked, "why didn't we fight back sooner, before they hurt us?" Stopped walking. He looked at the names on the wall, friends he had known, neighbors he had loved, children who had played in his garden. "Because fighting is easy," he said softly. "Any scared animal can bite when it's cornered. Any angry person can throw a punch. But choosing peace, truly choosing it when you have the power to destroy your enemies, that is hard. That takes strength. But we did fight eventually." Yes, he touched a name on the wall, the doctor who had saved so many lives before the end. Because there are some things worth fighting for, some lines that cannot be crossed. We did not fight because we wanted revenge. We fought because we had to protect what we loved. The little girl thought about this. So we were strong because we waited. Smiled. We were strong because we gave them every chance to stop. We were strong because we showed them kindness for 300 years and only chose violence when they forced us to. We were strong because even when we won, we did not become monsters. He looked up at the sky, where ships from a dozen races passed overhead. Trade ships, diplomatic vessels, A galaxy at peace because humanity had paid the price to make it so. Remember this, little one. The most dangerous enemy is not the one who attacks first. It is the one who gives you every opportunity to walk away. The one who shows you patience and kindness and mercy. Because when that enemy finally decides to fight, he trailed off, watching a human warship pass overhead on patrol. Even now, 50 years later, the fleet remained ready, always watching, always waiting. When that enemy finally decides to fight, the little girl finished, nothing can stop them. Nodded, nothing can stop them. They walked through the garden in silence, past the names of the dead, and toward the future the living had built. Behind them, the black walls stood eternal, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. Humanity had learned its lesson well. Peace was precious, patience was strength, kindness was power. But some lines should never be crossed. And if they were, humanity would be waiting.